So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our roster of wonderful filmmakers. Thank you all so much for joining us in this virtual space this Sunday afternoon. It's really nice to see you all. And I want to talk first to Ibrahim Awara, the director of our feature film this year, Visitor. Now, Ibrahim, this is a fascinating film and a very mind-bending and puzzling one on many levels. But one of the things that jumped out to me most in watching the film was the imagery of the Rubik's Cube, because we see the protagonist of the film, Vincent, playing with this very strange and unusual-looking silver metallic Rubik's Cube that doesn't even seem to be perfectly a cube. It actually has sort of unusual dimensions and features to it. So I'm interested how you even came in contact with this unusual object, how you decided or what inspired you to incorporate it in the film, and what does it symbolize in the story?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks very much for having me, Christopher. And I just want to say I feel very privileged to be selected, alongside such a fantastic portfolio of films and filmmakers. It's a great question about the Rubik's Cube and Visitor. It was actually originally part of the script, but we hadn't yet sort of done sort of the production side of acquiring all the different sort of elements of the film. And my set designer came across this sort of interesting geometric Rubik's Cube. We found it on Amazon, essentially. And I felt it was, incredibly fitting, within the story. And as you say, the story is essentially about lots of sort of moving pieces, and the idea is that we try to create something that would be a sort of Rubik's Cube puzzle for audiences. Mm-hmm. And we felt so it was quite fitting that the protagonist, had this, in his hand on stage throughout the film. It was meant to symbolize the kind of journey, essentially, that we were intending to take the audience through. I also felt, as you mentioned, this Rubik's Cube is sort of, made of aluminium, and it's reflective. And this is sort of a very subtle thing that we try to do post-production, but there are clues in some of the reflections in the Rubik's Cube as to, some of the revelations that kind of come later on in the film. I don't want to sort of give too much away, but it was just a happy kind of confluence of things, and we felt that that kind of geometric Rubik's Cube really fit the bill for what we were trying to, kind of say with the film.
Wow, that's really interesting, because you could argue that Visitor as a narrative experience is kind of like a puzzle in itself. So without giving any spoilers to people that haven't seen the film yet, it really does seem like once the puzzle is complete that the story also locks into place as well. So fascinating. Right. So thank you so much. Next, I'd love to talk with Il Shin, the director of Signal Fire. Now, Alice, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you about the poems that we see in your film, because during your film there are two instances where we're presented with these very beautiful old poems that are displayed on the screen in text. And we have a chance to really savor the words and the language of these beautiful old poems. How did you find them, and what inspired you to use them in the film?
Before explaining about the poem, I probably would explain about what concept of this film. Originally, there was a gallery project in the city of Markham, Ontario. The project concept was selected 6 filmmakers would reflect the characteristic of city of Markham, and I was selected one of 6 filmmakers. So I observed the city of Markham and realized almost 70% of populations were Asian. So I feel like I'm not a minority anymore over there. And especially Chinese Canadian were mainstream. So I've occasionally also heard there are communication issues between first generation of immigrant and third generation of immigrant, such as many of first generations are not fluent in English, but third generation of immigrants are fluent in English, but sometimes can't speak their parents' or grandparents' mother tongue. Mm-hmm. So in this concept, I'm Korean, so I needed to find some Chinese concept to express this kind of thing. And sometimes, expressing some like communication, you sometimes don't want to use many of language, especially I'm the lack of language of English. So I was asking around, if you know any interesting concept or something. And then fortunately, my friend in Chicago has sent me several Chinese poems over Messenger. And I feel like that could be maybe make sense. And then it left a big impression on me. So I wanted to visualize the poems and then combine the previous concept I was thinking, and quickly realized, well, I could make this film, and that's my film using that poem. So I was getting ready to pitch with this concept for a gallery exhibition in Markham, and fortunately, I was able to make this film funded by them.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm so glad that they were able to provide you with that support and assistance.
Thank you.
And we really love the poetry in your film because it gives the audience a chance to also be still and to contemplate and to go into kind of a more meditative space and take a moment away from moving the plot forwards to just kind of think about the feelings that we're processing as we watch your film. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next, I'd love to talk with Cassandra Paige, the director of With Love, Tommy. Now, Cassandra, your film is partially set and prominently features in a beautiful 1950s era camping trailer, which is filled with vintage furniture and vintage appliances. And it has this very specific visual aesthetic. I suppose you could call it retro, but I'd love to hear in your own words how you came across this furniture or this camper, and why you decided to incorporate it in film, and what that style or that era of decor means to you. What does it represent?
Yeah, so the camper is actually an Airbnb. We rented it and stayed in it, so it was really fun. And it's in the middle of nowhere, like in Nelson, outside of Nelson. And she had all that vintage stuff in there, and I was like, this is the best location scouting I have ever done. And so we just rented it, set up, and shot in there. But yeah, the style is very like reminiscent of like old style love versus this idea of new style love. And then it's hilarious because the main character is a television set. And so it's kind of like pushing the boundaries of like old values, new values, tradition, crazy weird stuff. And yeah, it just went along so perfectly that we were like, this is great. We have to shoot here.
Wow. Well, I know where I'm taking my next vacation. I mean,
yes.
Send me that Airbnb link.
I will.
It's really fascinating that you say that because over the course of the story, we see Tommy, which is the sort of antique or vintage television, as he goes on his journey, being in a hotel room where there's a more modern flat screen digital TV in the room, in the space. So there is that meeting of the old and the new embodied in your films. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Totally, yeah.
Next up, I'd love to talk with Christine Seow, the director of Craft, which is just a stunning dance short. And Christine, your film has a number of eggs in it. And the dancers that we see in your film are manipulating these eggs. They're holding them, they're rolling them along their arms, they're holding them in the crook of their neck or in their elbow. And by the end of the film, we see these dancers surrounded by what looks like hundreds of eggs in this room. What do the eggs represent or symbolize for you? And what was the idea behind basing the film around that imagery?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I guess I have to kind of go back to the concept of it as well. So it is definitely a very interpretive piece, and the eggs actually symbolizes different things to my different dancers. So I have three dancers. So one is a main lead. I have two others supporting. And I mean, when we were making the film, we were actually brainstorming and all. And to them, it is quite an abstract kind of concept. And then they were saying that it represents an obstacle that they kind of have to overcome. One girl said that it actually represents hard work because it requires a lot of focus and energy to just balance the egg. And an interesting thing was another girl said that the egg was like a child to her. If she were to overprotect it, it will crack. But if she doesn't protect it at all, it will also crack. So it kind of reminds her that she has to maintain a very specific balance, a very tender one, just like how a mother and daughter or even a parent and child would have.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I mean, because we had a choreographer on it, and she would sometimes kind of like give them, an idea or philosophy to pretend that they are the egg itself, or they are in an egg. So in terms of movement wise, the way that they sometimes move. And I think overall the theme was about having strength and fragility, just like how the egg is hard on the outside, but soft and fragile on the inside. So I guess while making the film, I kind of had a storyline, even though it's quite abstract, and I don't think the audience will be able to capture it. But it's kind of the lead dancer somehow has some sort of rebirth at the start, and she meets someone and gets connected. But after some time, there's a fight or a tension build up where until it reaches a point where they are seated apart. And that's where another girl comes in and tries to mold her into becoming someone else. And so I think there's this portion of the film where there's a trio segment, and that's where the whole idea of conforming comes to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, while my dancers and the choreographer have their own ideas of what the egg symbolizes, I guess to me, the way I interpreted it was that, especially at the end, like what you mentioned, the main dancer was kind of being molded or sculpted by the other two. And she was a puppet, and she sort of became a egg statue. So I guess to me, I somehow saw some sort of brokenness in conformity. And therefore, at the end, the dancers are surrounded with hundreds of like cracked eggs.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really interesting. And I really like your comments about how there is kind of a paradox embodied in the symbolism of the egg, because like you say, it is strong, but also fragile on the inside. And there is a hardness in the shell, but also a softness on the inside. It's something that kind of reflects the way in which the dancers also need to be balanced and present and careful about their movements, but at the same time, fluid and go with the flow and be flexible at the same time. So really interesting comments. Thank you so much, Christine. Next, I would love to chat with Ibrahim Awara, the director of Visitor, once again. Now, Ibrahim, this was your first experience directing a film of this length. A feature-length film. So what advice would you give to emerging filmmakers who are looking to also make the jump into feature film filmmaking or to transition from making shorts to making features? What did you learn in this experience?
Sure. I think with Visitor as a concept, as an idea, it was a story that I'd sort of visited early on in the form of a short film originally. And it was sort of an idea that still wouldn't let me go even after that short film was sort of made and done. And I felt there was a lot more there that I could expand on and unpack. And I think the experience of making a feature and maybe the advice that I would have is that it all starts, and I think we regularly hear this as filmmakers, it all starts on the page. Mm-hmm. I think the schematic, the script is the foundations of any story, and I think you need to have that. Yeah, you need to have something there. As clear as possible, really, before you can kind of take the step, the pretty monumental step, honestly, of kind of bringing together a team and a project like a feature. But I think, many of the things that are true to shorts are also true to features, just on larger scale. I think that the collaboration element of all films is even more pronounced in the context of feature filmmaking. I was incredibly lucky to have a fantastic group of people around me to help me make this film. And I think really for every filmmaker, I think it's different, when they feel comfortable kind of taking that step forward. But it is, I think, about, having the foundations of a great story on page and then marshalling around you a group of, talented collaborators who are really good at what they do, and being able to sort of delegate more, I think, as well, to individuals who you trust with your vision, whether it's set decorators, a cinematographer, or lighting, or gaffer, or sound. You have to be able to kind of trust these people to carry your vision forward, and trust that they understand, all the elements, all the moving parts of the story enough to be able to kind of sort of meet their end of the bargain, so that it kind of comes together as this seemingly sort of unified thing, even though really there's a lot of people playing a lot of different parts. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I suppose the sort of little nuggets of advice there, but to be honest, I'm still really genuinely as well learning. This is my first feature. I as soon as I think as you make a film, you realize the issues with it. You know, there's a lot of things that I wish I could go back in time and improve and stuff. And these are all lessons that you take forward with you, I think. But I think it's all about a strong foundation and great collaborators.
Wow, that's excellent advice. I couldn't agree more. Like you say, making a feature is, in a sense, just a larger scale version of making a short, but you need to have the foundation of story. You know, you need to have the script worked on more so than, arguably the production side of things. Productions come together; they have a way of just gelling in their own way, but story is something that has to be in place first. And I also agree with your comments about trust. As someone that is responsible for putting together this festival, which has a similar feel of having a lot of moving parts and a lot of collaborators and a lot of people each doing their contributions. The role of putting trust in your team is incredibly important. So that's absolutely advice that I would agree with myself as well. Maybe you can mentor me a little bit, because I'd like to make the jump into features at some point too. So maybe I'll pick your brain about that later.
Absolutely, anytime.
So I'd like to speak again to Il Shin, the director of the wonderful short film Signal Fire. Now, your film, Alice, has very little spoken dialogue in it. It is not a silent film, but it tells the story mostly with physical gestures and with body language, and with a lot of gaze, with the glance, with the sight lines of actors, and with point of view shots. So how did you decide on this storytelling style for your film, and does it convey a certain theme or a message?
Well, yeah, to answer your question, I'd like to explain my background a little bit. I was born and raised in Korea, South Korea, and studied filmmaking in Japan. And now I'm living and making films in Canada. So I could say I was standing kind of margin areas and observing people who have similar situations. Like those people could be newcomer or refugee and people of color in Western countries. Mm-hmm. So because of this background, I usually fascinate the moment strangers have a moment which shows the possibility to be bonded. So my independent films have always asked the simple question, like, how do we communicate with those we don't understand each other? Mm-hmm. So as an immigrant twice over, this is a question close to my heart. And my film, Signal Fire, at this Mirror Mountain Film Festival was created from this idea as well. So in my film, Signal Fire, it is more than just language that separates the old and young men, but there are many cultural practices as well. Yet there is also shared understanding that reaches across this gap. It might be love that does it, but it also comes from effort. So my message is, by wanting to know each other, you've already taken the first step. I can say that.
Wow. That's really profound. Thank you so much for that answer. And I think that really speaks to just the emotional lift that your film gives us in the end, when we realize that the young man and the grandfather really have bonded, really have made a connection. I love the last line of your film where they're in the car and they say, "Oh, we had a great conversation," even though the audience knows that there was no speaking going on out loud. Right. But there was a conversation, there was a connection being formed. So that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, I'd love to talk again with Cassandra Paige, the director of With Love, Tommy, which is just a wonderful, charming short. And one of the things that is so funny and charming and delightful about this film is Tommy himself, who is a character that is brought to life despite being an inanimate object. Tommy is, in fact, a television set. But it seems to come to life on the screen as a real three-dimensional character. So in terms of maybe the storytelling or in terms of the special effects, how did you bring Tommy to life on the screen?
Yeah, so Tommy is an actual vintage TV that Jordan, the cinematographer, and Kieran, the voiceover for Tommy, hollowed out. And then we put a RV, little RC car in it so that it could drive. And then there's just me behind the camera, with the remote control driving it. So that was really fun. They were really stoked on it because it was such a weird thing to do. I was like, I want a TV that drives. And they were like, okay. But they made it happen and it was great. And I really like the idea of it being, again, a vintage, old style TV, because then it had those moments of like facing off with the huge flat screen, or like these little moments that just made it so much more special. And he was so portable, because originally it was going to be a massive TV, but then they were like, that's not going to go anywhere.
Well, that's
So yeah,
really illuminating to know. We were looking for the strings. We were
yeah,
like pausing the film. It's like, where are the strings that are pulling the TV? Or we thought
yeah,
maybe it was stop motion. Like, did you like place it and then take a frame and then place it and take a frame?
right,
But it turns out that there's actually just a remote control car inside the shell of the TV.
yeah,
Is that right? Wow. Ingenuity in filmmaking.
yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer. Well, Tommy really does seem to be alive on screen, so it's a testament to just how clever your ideas were that it worked as well as it did. Thank you so much, Cassandra. Next, I'd love to talk again with Christine Seow, the director of Cracked. And Christine, your film is set in a room that is very interesting. It's an unusual physical space, as well as having an unusual theme with all of the cracked eggs, because the room, like the eggs, is also wrapped. And it has these white walls that are kind of egg-like as well. And to add to the mystery, there's also a tree growing right up out of the middle of the ground that sort of acts as a centerpiece of the room. How did you come across this unusual space? Where did you find it? And what does the space mean or symbolize or represent to you in the film? Why is this specific shooting location chosen, and why is it significant in the visual imagery of the film?
Yeah, so actually my choreographer was part of a dance program, and this dance program actually had a requirement that the dance itself had to be site specific. So meaning that the dance could only be built on that specific site itself. And so if you take that dance out of that site, the dance wouldn't have made sense. And so the site that was under discussion, and my choreographer actually was under the residency for, she actually chose this site. So when I came in a picture, wanting to make a film about it was interesting because he said it was a room, but when I first saw it, it was actually an outdoor space and it was really ugly. And so of course visually I would be like, oh no, I can't shoot, and worst of all, there's a tree in the middle. If I could, I would chop it down, but because the tree kind of blocks all of our angles, and it became difficult to kind of cheat. Then how would we shoot it? We didn't want to shoot we didn't want to shoot this dance film on a gimbal. And so we wanted to make it look in a certain aesthetic manner. And I think the tree was difficult. It was blocking the composition of it.
Mm.
And I guess ultimately, after much discussions, I decided to bring in a backdrop, to kind of give it a flow and a kind of texture to the dance when the dancers actually move. So, well, I guess when you said it looked like a room, I guess I'm quite happy with that, because it was an outdoor space in which we couldn't control the lighting as well. And so that was like the worst concern, right? Like it was totally out in the middle and I couldn't do anything. And my DP, my cinematographer was like, oh, what can we do? We are definitely restricted in terms of location. And comparing to the other dancers who are part of the residency program that I saw the other sites, I was like, oh no, like we perhaps got the worst site that was possible and we have to make do with it, right? Yeah. So I guess that was an interesting thing, which actually, I guess worked to our benefit, because in the middle, the way the tree composed and everything, and the circular shape of the wall, I think it kind of gives a parallel to the kind of visuals that we're trying to achieve, as well as the meaning of it as well. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting, Christine. Thank you for that answer. I am completely floored to learn for the first time that this was shot in an outdoor location, because it really does seem like not only an indoor space, but one that is kind of private and insular and cloistered and secluded in a way. And it almost feels like the dancers are inside an egg themselves. So you did an amazing job concealing or modifying aspects of this location in order to make the film work. It worked beautifully. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. So I'd like to just thank all of our filmmakers once again for joining us. Alice, Ibrahim, Cassandra, and Christine, thank you very much for your interesting and fascinating responses. So thank you again, everybody, for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the show.